September is ending and October is almost here, which means two things. The MLB postseason is on the horizon, and those bloated September rosters are going to get cut down to 26 once again. So let's put on our GM hats and try to create the best 26-man roster for the Guardians as they go into this MLB postseason and hopefully bring home a World Series title.
And let's kick things off with the starting lineup. And what better way to start your starting lineup than with Steven Kwan? Putting all of my bias aside, he is one of the best leadoff hitters in MLB and still one of the best fielders in MLB. And I know what all the haters are saying. He's struggled as of late, but you know what? He's going to be coming off the IL. And you remember what happened last time he came off the IL? He was the best baseball player on the planet. And you have no evidence to prove to me that that won't happen again. And as far as his injury goes, I think he'll be fine in time for the playoffs. And if not, we postpone the postseason. And in that second slot of the lineup, we have an experiment that has gone right. Kyle Manzardo has been on fire lately. And I can't say I'm surprised, but I definitely didn't expect him to be this good this fast. Like Kwan, he has great plate discipline and he has a lot of pop. And when you can throw another power bat into the lineup that can get on base in other ways, it makes this lineup very scary. And he's not the prototypical two-hitter that we familiarized ourselves with in Cleveland. But to me, I'm confident in his ability to get on base, and that's great for a two-hitter. And his inclusion at the top of the lineup won't only give him more at-bats, but it'll allow the team to lengthen their lineup and put better hitters at the bottom of the lineup as well. The one thing with Manzardo, though, is he is a clear candidate for a platoon split, and I think the Guardians have the perfect guy for that. We'll circle back to that later. And batting third, we have the star of the show, Jose Ramirez. Jose's been amazing. There's not much else I could say. Most people, when they think of the Guardians, they think of Jose Ramirez. And hopefully by the time I post this, he's leading the Guardians into the postseason with a 40-40 season. Batting cleanup should not be a surprise either. It's Josh Naylor. Manzardo might be the first baseman of the future, but Naylor is the first baseman right now. He's a big-time hitter and a big game performer. And if the Guardians face off against the Yankees, Josh Naylor owns Garrett Cole. That's his baby son. He will be the reason that the Guardians sweep the Yankees this year. And then in the fifth batting slot, I have Lane Thomas. He's bounced around the lineup a bit this year, but he's seemed to find a home in that fifth position. He's definitely not had his best start to his Cleveland career, but he's rebounded and become a league average hitter once again. And that base running is gonna make up for it. I got him playing center field, and he is a defensive liability, but he's looked okay, and he can always be replaced in a close game. Batting sixth, we have the second baseman, Andres Gimenez. And while Gimenez has not had a good hitting year, he's definitely been an above-average hitter in September, and he's the best defensive second baseman in the game, a great anchor in the infield. And I truly think Andres Gimenez is one of the biggest X factors for the Guardians, because when they can get production from him, it usually translates to wins. And in the seventh spot, we may have our first controversial pick of the video. It's Jonk, Big Christmas, Jhonkensy Noel. He came out of the gates on fire, putting up numbers similar to Aaron Judge in a small sample size. And unsurprisingly, he's cooled off a lot, but that does not change the fact that he is in scoring position as soon as he steps in the batter's box. Plate discipline continues to be an issue with him, but in the postseason where home runs seem to be even more important, I just don't see a world where you leave an imposing batter like Noel off your roster. Batting eighth is pretty simple. It's Bo Naylor. He's the best catcher on the roster, and there's not much else I could say, really. He's had a disappointing offensive year, but it hasn't been horrible, and he's really stepped it up defensively. He's your catcher. And then rounding out the starting lineup is shortstop Brian Rocchio. I know Rocchio has a lot of haters, and yes, he has not been perfect. But when you really assess the situation, he's the best shortstop in the organization right now. He makes some really bad errors, but overall, he's a really good defender. And while at times he's looked useless at the plate, he's actually been a decent hitter in the second half, at least a lot closer to league average than he was in the first half. He's not going to be a star, but he's the best shortstop available. Now let's sort out the rest of the hitters, and we'll start with the bench. The first guy off the bench is going to be all-star David Fry. Fry's going to be your platoon option with Kyle Manzardo as the DH, and I'm not exactly sure how his elbow injury is doing, but he's at least played in the field somewhat at first base recently. But if that elbow is feeling okay, he could possibly be an emergency third baseman, corner outfielder, or most importantly, emergency catcher. But his main role will be right-handed DH. Speaking of catchers, the backup catcher is going to be Austin Hedges. Not the best hitter, but he's a stellar defender and he plays a great backup catcher. But most importantly, he plays the role of being Austin Hedges, and he won a World Series last year, and he's going to be the reason that the Guardians win it this year. And here's where decisions start to get tough. My third bench spot goes to Angel Martinez. And the main reason he gets it is that he plays almost every position. He's played every outfield spot, third base and second base. And of course, he came up as a shortstop. On top of that, he's a switch hitter, so he provides the ultimate utility to your bench. He's had his ups and downs, but the Guardians obviously believe in him, batting him high up in the lineup, either first or second. He's young but very valuable. And I can hear the boos already. My fourth and final bench spot is going to Miles Straw. Public perception has definitely soured on Straw, and he spent most of the year at AAA Columbus this year. But when constructing the playoff roster, he really provides something that the guys that are off this roster don't. And that's great Gold Glove defense and speed. And if Lane Thomas is the starting center fielder, you're going to want to have Straw on your bench to sub in tight games as a defensive replacement. It really was a tough decision, but Straw's defense really makes him more of an asset than the guys I left off this roster. And real quickly, before we get into the pitchers, I want to go over the guys that I am leaving off the playoff roster. Firstly, Will Brennan. Definitely the hardest decision to make here. If they had a 27th roster spot, he'd be coming with them. But for now, he's going to be on the taxi squad. If Steven Kwan can't play, he's definitely going to be making the roster. And if the team decides to go with one less reliever or take him over Miles Straw, I wouldn't be surprised. But ultimately, my decision to leave him off came down to three factors. Number one being that he's not a great hitter. The main role he would be fulfilling on this roster would be the lefty off the bench. But he's not that good against righties compared to Jhonkensy Noel and Lane Thomas. He's a little bit better with an OPS of 707 compared to Jock's 701 and Lane's 658. But both those guys give you more, and Will Brennan is just not good enough at that one thing to be a one-trick pony on this team. The number two reason is there are a lot of lefties already in the lineup. In my perfect starting lineup, you have Kwan, Jimenez, the Naylor brothers, Manzardo, and both Jose and Rocchio being switch hitters. To me, that makes adding another lefty to the mix not that important. And then the third reason is kind of the nail in the coffin. He's not a great defender. Off eye test alone, he's a decent defender, but when you look at the analytics, he's really not that good. -2 outs above average is better than Lane Thomas, but if you're looking for a defensive replacement, you gotta look towards Miles Straw here. Other guys that are just not making the cut include Daniel Schneemann, who would be playing a similar role to Angel Martinez as a super utility guy. Schneemann has struggled against righties, and as a lefty, that does not help his chances of making the roster as a platoon guy. Overall, he's been a decent major league player, but he hasn't been productive enough recently to make the major league roster over Angel Martinez, who I definitely think has been better as of late and probably has more potential. Jonathan Rodriguez, who's been tearing it up at AAA, but really hasn't shown anything in the majors. On that same note, Gabriel Arias, aside from the occasional spectacular play in hard-hit baseball, Arias has kind of solidified himself as a quad A player. If he has a future with the Guardians, it's definitely not coming in this postseason. Then we got another taxi squad candidate with Brennan and Schneemann. It's Tyler Freeman. He's been up in the majors the majority of this year, but really fizzled out towards the end of the year and was sent down to AAA. He's not necessarily been bad, and his expected numbers are better than his actual numbers, meaning that he's probably been a little unlucky, but there's simply just too many good right-handed bats to have Tyler Freeman on the major league roster, right now at least. Just for fun, I wanted to mention Juan Brito and Chase DeLauder, who look to be very exciting prospects, but I'm looking for them to have their first major league action in the regular season next year, not in the playoffs this year. Now that that's sorted, let's move on to the pitchers. And don't you miss Shane Bieber? I'm really hoping the Guardians re-sign him next year. He looked like a Cy Young candidate in his first two starts this year. He definitely would have been our Game 1 starter, but he's injured, so we got to go with Tanner Bibee. Now, I don't think this should be a shock to anyone. I know he has some doubters throughout the fan base, but Bibee's been just straight up the best starter on the roster. I believe in Bybee and the team believes in Bybee. And when the team's going through a rough spot, he's the guy they kind of look to get them out of it. And that kind of mentality of we need to win today, you're going to go get it. That's what you're looking for in a game one starter. I also believe he's going to get the ball in an elimination game. And for your number 2 starter, I think it makes a lot of sense to go with Matthew Boyd. Boyd has looked really, really good ever since coming off the IL. And while he doesn't have a lot of playoff experience, he's been in the league for a very long time, and I like that. His breaking ball has looked nasty lately, and his fastball has found new life. The starting rotation as a whole has looked kind of mid, but Matthew Boyd has shined through, and I think he's a solid pick for your number 2 starter. And then for the 3 starter, I'm going with Alex Cobb. And he's the last guy here that I'm going to be confident in saying, yeah, that's a starter, especially with a shortened rotation in the playoffs. He's dealing with a broken fingernail and a blister, but those are use injuries, and I think the Guardians are just letting him sit those out as they heal in preparation for the playoffs. I think he'll be ready to go. He's pitched 3 games with the Guardians and looked really good in 2 of them, but Cobb is a gamer. He's going to go out there and get you a good chance to win no matter the circumstances. And Cleveland's been on the wrong end of that in the past. I'll feel pretty confident handing him the ball to start a playoff game no matter what. And then these next 3 guys are starters, but I think they might have a extra short leash or they might come out of the bullpen in the playoffs. First up, I have Gavin Williams, and I think he's the best pitcher out of these 3 guys. He's had rough spots, don't get me wrong, but he shows flashes of Garrett Cole. And that could be good and bad. Yes, you're going to have the overpowering fastball, but you're also going to give up a lot of home runs. But the big rig is going to be an important tool come playoff time. If it was my choice and you were in need of a 4th starter, I would probably give the ball to Gavin Williams, chiefly because his issues seem to be coming from missed locations and not struggling the 2nd or 3rd time through the lineup. And I think his mechanics have gotten better, his pitch location has gotten better, especially recently, and for that reason I think he can get you a little deeper into ball games than the next 2 guys. Ben Lively might not have the overpowering fastball of Gavin Williams, but he's been a very decent starting pitcher, and I think that will translate well to being a very decent reliever. Or a long reliever opener type that goes and gets you 3 innings, but I think that might be his cap. Lively really struggled in August, but overall he's been a rock in the rotation this year. I hate to take him out of the rotation, but I think that his struggles the 2nd and 3rd time through the lineup might point to him being better suited for a relief role in the playoffs. And the same thing goes for Joey Cantillo. He had that breakout game against the White Sox where he was perfect through more than 7 innings, and his changeup, curveball, and fastball have all looked really good as he's had good control over all the pitches. He's just continued to have struggles with the 2nd and 3rd time through the lineup, especially against good teams, and I think that maybe a move to the bullpen might be good for him in the playoffs. I am very impressed with how fast he was able to make adjustments, though, and that makes me hopeful for his future for sure. Now let's move on to the bullpen guys, and of course we got Emmanuel Clase. He might be having the greatest reliever season of all time, and he's probably going to finish 2nd in AL Cy Young voting. He's going to be very important in the playoffs, and he's been flirting with throwing a 2-seam fastball. I'd be curious to see if he adds that to his playoff pitch arsenal. Next up is rookie Cade Smith, and he's been lights out all year out of the bullpen, and he's really flourished as the get me out of a tough spot guy for Stephen Vogt. Whenever the team's been in a tough spot, you know you can count on Cade Smith to get you 3 to 4 outs. My one concern with Cade Smith is that he is a rookie and he's pitched a lot this year, but it does seem that they have done a good job of managing his workload. He really has not gone over 20 pitches at all this year. He's going to be ready to take on the playoffs. And then the converted starter, Hunter Gaddis, who's been absolutely excellent in sort of a setup man role. He's technically a rookie, but I'm not as concerned about his pitch limit as he made his debut all the way back in 2022 as a starter. And he's had that same 20 pitch limit this year. I'm going to be comfortable giving the ball to Gaddis in a lot of high leverage situations. He's blown a couple games this year, but I think any Gaddis haters are definitely looking at it in the wrong way. He's been really, really good for the majority of the year, and he's had a couple mistakes. He's a dog. Then we got Tim Herron, who's the top lefty in the bullpen, and he's technically a rookie, but he's been lights out as well. He's just another high leverage reliever you got, but he's a lefty, so that's great. He's an essential piece to this roster. And then we get the September call-up, Andrew Walters, and this dude's looked amazing too. 6 innings, 6 Ks, no earned runs. And I believe he is the 5th closer-level reliever in this absolutely stacked Cleveland bullpen. I mean, that's 5 guys that I'm comfortable going to in any situation. That's going to be huge in October. And that leaves us with 2 more bullpen spots, assuming that the Guardians go with 13 pitchers. And that's based on how playoff rosters were constructed in the past, where those rosters seemed more pitcher heavy. But maybe Vogt wants to go more batter focused. He might look at this group of pitchers and trust them to go deeper into ball games than you normally would, and get more length from your relievers. So if that's the case, maybe I would expect to have someone like Will Brennan on this roster and the 26th guy to be left off. But right now, let's focus on number 25, Eli Morgan. He's going to settle into more of an innings eater role here, whereas he was once a starter, but has really found his footing as a reliever in the major leagues. I think he may be the guy to go out there and get you 2 innings when you need it, maybe not the closest ball game. But if you look back just to last year, he was the setup man, at times at least, and he's gotten better. His changeup is one of the best pitches in the league, and that's not an exaggeration. And he's just an insane option to have as an innings eater in your bullpen, and maybe the 6th best reliever on your team. And that leaves the last roster spot to another September call-up, Eric Sabrowski. Sabrowski is a lefty who's had a long road to the major leagues. He's dealt with plenty of injuries, but he's finally gotten his shot, and he has not taken it for granted. 11 1/3 innings pitched, 16 strikeouts, no runs given up. Arguably a more impressive stat line than Walters. I mean, he's kind of come out of nowhere, but he's been lights out. I definitely think his performance has played him onto the playoff roster. I don't see them leaving him off. And really, when you're looking at this bullpen, it's so good. I think it's good enough to win the team the World Series. I know I've said it before, but this may be the best bullpen of all time, and I really think it's going to be a huge weapon in the playoffs. And with a guy like Sabrowski being your 7th reliever, how could it not be? And take a look at this. Of those 7 guys, the highest ERA is Tim Herron's with a 1.95. That's just ridiculous. And the side effect of such a stacked bullpen is that there are going to be some pretty good relievers that aren't going to make the playoff roster. And the first one is Nick Sandlin for me. It wasn't a stretch to say that Nick Sandlin was one of the best relievers, especially in the clutch in the first half of the season. Unfortunately, he got injured, and once he came back, he just wasn't the same. He really struggled in the second half, and I don't think you could trust him going into the playoffs in high leverage situations, and honestly with the pitchers that we do have, really in any situation. I'm sure he'll be on the taxi squad, but I don't want him pitching in the postseason. And then there's Pedro Avila, who's been a pretty decent reliever, but he's been mostly the innings eater guy, and there's not that many innings to eat in the playoffs. Pretty much every inning is going to matter, and I think there's just better relievers to do this job. Like Sandlin, this is a hard choice, but I think the other relievers are just better. But I'm sure Pedro will be on call in case anyone gets injured. Peter Strzelecki was pretty good, and he's still on the 40-man, but he's not going to make it. There's just too many good relievers. It's been fun DFAing and picking back up Anthony Gose, and it's cool that he's gotten a second career as a pitcher, but he's not going to make the postseason roster. Then as far as starters who won't make it, Tristan McKenzie, he's just had such a rough year. He's dealing with that elbow injury still, and I have hope for him since he's been so good in the past. He's just going to have to wait until next year to see if he could turn it around. And the same goes for Logan Allen to a lesser degree. He's never really been as good as Tristan McKenzie, but I still have some hope for him. Hopefully he can find a way to turn it around next year. And then finally, Carlos Carrasco. I don't even know if he's healthy right now, but if he was, I don't think that he would make the cut either way. He's not been the worst pitcher in the league, but he's not his old self. I do hope they bring him along in some sort of a coach role maybe, since he's been in the playoffs before and he has that veteran status. And if any of you are getting ready to comment, you missed James Karinchak, no, stop it. In conclusion, I really like this roster. I think it's a lot better than the 2022 roster. Lots of power in the lineup and an insane bullpen. And I think the starters are good enough. Vibes are immaculate right now. And as I'm recording this, the Guards are getting ready to play 3 games against Houston to end the season. Then they'll be on their way to hopefully win a World Series. Let me know if there's any roster changes you would make to my perfect roster. But let's go Guards!